What's going on? Vincent Rapisardi, BigBlueUnbiased.com. Thank you to those who like, commented, and subscribed. Really appreciate it, guys. Make sure to turn notifications on, so every time I post, you get a notification, and you can come join in on the conversation. So in this video, I want to talk about Daniel Jones. I talked about him in my last video because we talked about Trevor Lawrence, potentially to the Giants. I don't think the Giants will get the number one pick. I don't think they'll get an opportunity to draft Trevor Lawrence, but it's an interesting discussion to have. So I'll talk about Daniel Jones and why the Giants offense, their struggles, is it really his fault, or is he just running into some bad luck because of the poor play of his teammates? So we'll get into that. Also talk about Lorenzo Carter. He is taking the next step in his third NFL season here. We'll get into that. And Blake Martinez as well. He's playing really, really well. Okay, so let me start with Daniel Jones. I saw someone complain in my last video that I didn't get to the point quick enough. All right, I'll get to the point. So Daniel Jones, if you look at the performance of his teammates on offense, it has not been good. They are ranked 25th or worse in pass and run block win rate. Yes, they have played tough opponents, but still, they are ranking near the bottom in pass and run block win rate. You look at the drop percentage of his wide receivers. You're talking about the 7th highest drop percentage in the NFL at 8%. You're also talking about an offensive line that has allowed the 4th most pressures, and Daniel Jones has been blitzed more than any other quarterback, 40 times this season. Now, this doesn't mean that Daniel Jones deserves no blame. I mean, the Giants are 30th in EPA, expected points added on offense. They have not been good. So Daniel Jones certainly deserves some blame, and I will get into that. But at the same time, he is not being helped out by his teammates in any way, shape, or form. And think about this as well. No preseason games, new offensive coordinator. And if you look at, this is something I've pointed out a few times in terms of the overall motion at the snap for the Giants offense. It went from 1.6% in week 1 to 5% in week 2. In total, 5% after week 2. So they started, I believe, making things a little bit more complicated. I believe that because there was no preseason, Week 1, the Giants had to keep their game plan fairly simple on offense because new offensive coordinator who's never ever played a single game, not even a preseason game, with his group. I think once you start moving players around, you're making things a little bit more complicated for the opposing team and for your own team because now you got players moving around doing different things, and most likely you're adding different wrinkles into your offense. It's not as simple or simplistic. So I think you're going to see them start playing better, because I think Jason Garrett's really going to start to run his offense the way that he wants to run it. But at the end of the day, in terms of his teammates, right, Daniel Jones's teammates, no matter how simple or sophisticated your offense is, you have to run block, you have to pass block, and you have to catch the football. And they have not done any of those things very well so far this season. Now let's talk about Daniel Jones and his play this season. I've done a video where I've explained his completion percentage over expectation is really good this year. You want to be one of the top quarterbacks in that category because it means that you're completing passes you're not expected to complete. Good quarterbacks can make throws that the bad quarterbacks can't make, right? But one thing that is concerning so far, looking at his numbers, his intended air yards. He's ranked 31st in the NFL in intended air yards at 6.1 yards. The reason that is concerning is because his aggressiveness percentage is the 4th highest. So I have actually done a video on this. I did this in the offseason, and I explained how if you're going to be aggressive, right, aggressiveness percentage takes into account throws into tight windows. If you're going to be aggressive, right, you're going to have a high aggressiveness percentage, throws into tight windows, you want there to be a legitimate reward. If you're throwing a 3-yard pass and it's into a tight window, most likely the reward is very, very small unless that player catches it, breaks a tackle, and turns it into a 20-yard gain. For the most part, the reward is very small compared to a 25-yard play down the field. The reward is big, right? That's a big-time play downfield. So taking that risk, at least you can make the argument, okay, he's taking a legitimate risk with a legitimate reward. Here's the video that I did earlier in the offseason. So let's look at this play from Week 6 versus the New England Patriots last year. Second quarter, 2nd and 10. Giants have good field position. Jones is back, good protection. And he makes a throw into an incredibly tight window between Devin McCourty and Jamie Collins. Now, last year, Jones ranked 3rd in aggressiveness percentage, which takes into account throws into tight windows. Now, this stat can be looked in a good way or a bad way depending on yards per attempt. So basically, risk versus reward. The problem was that Jones only averaged 6.6 yards per attempt last year, which was 29th in the league among quarterbacks. Now, to add context, both Darius Slayton and Golden Tate were in the bottom 10 when it came to separation yards, so his aggressiveness percentage certainly had something to do with the fact that his receivers just weren't getting enough separation. But as I talked about in the previous film room video of Daniel Jones, good quarterbacks normally have a high yards per attempt. So while his aggressiveness percentage is certainly high because of his receivers' lack of separation, you would still want him to increase his yards per attempt. Because again, it goes back to the risk versus reward. The Giants only picked up 5 yards on this second down play. And this ball could have very easily been intercepted, making it a very risky pass with very little reward. Okay, so let's move on to Lorenzo Carter. Lorenzo Carter, I feel like he was kind of the forgotten guy going into this season. He performed incredibly well in their first scrimmage game, had at least 3 sacks. And right now, 4 pressures through 2 weeks. And if you look at his snap total, right, he played 45% of snaps on defense as a rookie, 65 last season on defense, and now 98%. So basically the Giants are saying, okay, Lorenzo Carter is completely trusted to play basically every single snap. He is going to be a legitimate starter, not a rotational piece. He is a legitimate starter, and they trust him. They trust him, and they should, because he looks like a really good young player. He's starting to develop. And I think some people last year were a little bit discouraged with the 2018 Giants draft class in general, from Will Hernandez, Lorenzo Carter, B.J. Hill, even Saquon Barkley for most of the season. A lot of people were discouraged because they didn't feel like those players took the next step. But Lorenzo Carter, it looks like he is taking the next step in his 3rd year. And I tweeted this out in the offseason about Justin Tuck and Corey Webster. It really took into their 3rd year for them to really show their potential. And I said, relax. Lorenzo Carter showed some potential. It looks like he's a decent young player. Okay, he's not terrible. If you needed him to start, you could. And it looks like he's going to be more than that. I also quickly want to talk about Blake Martinez. Blake Martinez looks really good. Right now, he leads the NFL according to Pro Football Focus. I like Pro Football Focus analytics, by the way. So let me clear that up. Their player grades, I don't get. The subjective grading of players, I'm not a fan of it. But I do like their analytics. I think their analytics are fine. Their player grades, I'm not a huge fan of. And when you watch the game, it's pretty obvious to tell he's a very good tackler. He's a very good run defender. This was a good pickup by Dave Gettleman so far. When the Giants signed Blake Martinez, I personally probably would have went in another direction. I would have went with Joe Schobert because he's a better coverage linebacker in a pass-oriented league. But Blake Martinez was always a solid football player. I never had anything against him as a football player. I thought he was a good player. He wasn't the player I would have chose. So far, he is playing pretty well, and looks like Dave Gettleman, James Bradbury, Blake Martinez, so far standing out for the Giants. So thanks again for watching. Vincent Repisardi, Big Blue, Unbiased.com.